"Stop pretending," my dad yelled at me as I fought for air. My aunt said I was just trying to get out of cleaning. Until the paramedic checked my pulse, called for a gurney, and the panic broke out. My name is Ryan. I'm 26 years old. For as long as I can remember, my family has had a particular knack for turning even the simplest situation into a test of loyalty, one that, in their eyes, I never passed. It was as if they kept a mental scorecard of every time I didn't live up to their expectations, whether it was not eating enough at a dinner, being 5 minutes late to a barbecue, or refusing to laugh at one of my dad's hurtful comments. If I stood up for myself even a little, I was told I was too sensitive or that I was playing the victim. That was the environment I grew up in. Sarcasm and judgment disguised as familial bonding. It had always been small moments, the kind you could ignore for the sake of peace. My dad, Mark, was the kind of man who considered weakness a sin. His favorite phrases were, "Get over it and stop making excuses." My Aunt Laura, his older sister, was cut from the same cloth, though she wrapped her critiques in a false concern. She'd ask if I was okay, then add, "You've always been a bit fragile, haven't you?" My mom was largely silent, only interjecting enough to not seem completely alien to the group. And then there was my cousin Tyler, my Aunt Laura's golden child. At 30, he still lived at home and never helped out at get-togethers, yet he was constantly praised for being a hard worker. I soon learned that family events were not for enjoying company, but for proving you were worthy of belonging. As a young man, I joined their game. I smiled, I helped with chores, I tried to make myself invisible. But no matter how hard I tried, I was always the first to be criticized if something went wrong. My dad would find a way to blame me, and my Aunt Laura would nod her head, as if she were taking notes for later. On the day it all happened, I was already dreading the family barbecue. It was at my parents' house, which meant I couldn't miss it without causing a storm. The plan was the same as always. Eat, chat, and then clean for hours while my dad and Tyler relaxed in the living room watching television. I mentally prepared myself to get through the day in silence. I arrived on time, brought dessert, and even offered to help my mom set everything up before everyone else arrived. She accepted, although I knew from her tone that she considered it the bare minimum I could do. When everyone was there, the air felt heavy, partly from the summer heat and partly from the usual tension. The conversations were superficial, but I noticed the sidelong glances when I didn't laugh at Tyler's jokes about me being single. I kept myself busy, going from the kitchen to the patio, carrying trays of food and refilling drinks. At one point, the heat got to me and I felt a strange tightness in my chest. It was different from anything I'd ever felt, a mix of pressure and dizziness. I tried to ignore it, thinking I just needed to sit down for a minute, but when I finally leaned against the counter, my dad's voice broke through the background noise. "Stop pretending," he snapped from across the kitchen, squinting as if I had committed a crime. "There's still a bunch of dishes in the sink. You're not getting out of helping." I opened my mouth to explain that I really wasn't feeling well, but before I could, my Aunt Laura chimed in from the dining room table. "Oh please, Ryan. You've been pulling this stunt since you were a kid. The old 'I don't feel well' trick so you don't have to clean. He's just tired of standing, Mark. Don't coddle him." Her words stung in that familiar way, like a slap wrapped in velvet. But before I could defend myself, another wave of dizziness hit me. My vision blurred a little, and I had to hold on tightly to the counter. My breathing became shallow, each inhale shorter than the last. I could feel my fast and erratic pulse in my ears, and a cold sweat began to form on my neck. I just need. My voice sounded weak even to me. I tried to take a deeper breath, but my chest felt paralyzed. "Oh, for God's sake," my dad muttered. "Fine, sit down for a second, but don't think this means you're done helping." His words were sharp, almost impatient, as if I had just caused him a nuisance. I tried to walk to a chair, but halfway there, my legs gave out. I held onto the wall, and that's when my cousin Tyler looked up from his phone. "Wow, you're so dramatic," he said with a smirk. "You should have studied theater." I wanted to yell at them to make them see that it wasn't an act, but my breaths were getting faster, shallower, and more desperate. My chest was burning and my hands were tingling. I could feel the sense of panic closing in. It wasn't the kind of panic you can reason your way out of, but something physical and involuntary. It was then that my mom finally stood up and said, "Mark, maybe we should." But she didn't finish the sentence. Someone had already called an ambulance. I didn't even see who. All I knew was that moments later, a paramedic was in front of me, crouching down to look me in the eye. "Sir, can you hear me? How long have you been having trouble breathing?" I tried to answer, but only a forced gasp came out. He pressed 2 fingers to my neck to check my pulse, and his expression changed immediately. "We need a gunny now," he yelled toward the door. The change in the room was instantaneous. Chairs moved. Conversations were cut in half. My Aunt Laura's face turned pale and my dad stood still, as if someone had put him on pause. The buzz of the party faded, replaced by the swift, purposeful movements of the paramedics. And in that sudden suffocating silence, each of them realized at the same time that something was very wrong. But instead of that immediate wave of concern you'd expect from family, there was an awkward hesitation, as if they didn't know how to act now that their narrative about my dramatics didn't add up. My dad stood with his arms crossed, watching the paramedics bring in the gurney, as if he expected them to declare that it was all in my head. My Aunt Laura had a tense, polite smile, the same one she used when she pretended she hadn't just insulted someone. They loaded me onto the gurney and wheeled me toward the front door. I could hear fragments of their conversation behind me. They spoke in low voices, but I caught enough to understand the context. My Aunt Laura said something like, "Well, you know how Ryan is. He probably just got nervous. He's always been a bit theatrical." My dad murmured something in agreement. Even at that moment, as I was being taken to the ambulance, they were still clinging to the idea that I was faking it. The ride to the hospital felt like it lasted 2 minutes and 2 hours at the same time. My mind bounced between the growing panic over what was happening to my body, and a deep ache from knowing my own family had dismissed me so quickly. The paramedic kept talking to me, telling me to focus on breathing as best I could, that they were getting the oxygen ready. His voice was calm and steady, a lifeline I clung to. When I was finally stabilized in the emergency room, after several tests and treatments, I was exhausted in a way I had never felt before, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The doctor came in, serious but kind, and explained what had happened. I had suffered a severe allergic reaction, likely to something I had eaten at the barbecue. My throat had begun to close, my blood pressure had dropped, and if the ambulance had been delayed by just 10 minutes, things could have ended very differently. It was a lot of information to take in, but before I could process it, I saw my dad peeking through the door of my room. My Aunt Laura was behind him, holding a coffee cup as if it were just a casual visit. Tyler wasn't there. He had apparently gone home because there was nothing else he could do. My mom was in a corner, pretending to scroll through her phone, although I could see the worry in her eyes. "Are you okay?" My dad asked with the same tone he would use to ask if I was done using his lawnmower. The doctor gave him a stern look and then repeated, almost word for word, that it had been a potentially fatal reaction and that from now on I should take precautions. He even described the exact symptoms I had experienced, the same ones they had dismissed as laziness or dramatics. My dad nodded as if he understood, but then he said, "So what? Now he's allergic to barbecues." My Aunt Laura laughed softly as if it were a harmless joke and added, "We've all had food not agree with us sometimes. You just have to tough it out." The doctor didn't laugh. He looked at the three of them and then at me, clearly catching the dynamic, and said, "No, this isn't about toughing it out. He could have died." His voice was firm enough to silence the room for a few seconds, but I knew my dad. That kind of silence wasn't of acceptance, but of annoyance. I stayed in the hospital overnight for observation. My mom left early, saying she had to clean the house after the party. My Aunt Laura and my dad didn't come back the next morning. The only reason I got home was because a nurse arranged for a volunteer driver to take me. My own family didn't even bother to pick me up. When I got to my apartment that same day, still feeling weak, a message from my dad was already waiting for me. "Glad you're feeling better. Don't forget we have the family get-together in 2 weeks." There were no apologies, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just an expectation that I would show up again, ready to play my part as the butt of their jokes or the person they ignored until it was time to clean. I tried to let it go, at least for a few days, telling myself that maybe they just weren't comfortable with emotions and didn't know how to handle what had happened. But then the story started to spread. A cousin told me that my Aunt Laura had been saying that I had overreacted and made a scene at the barbecue, making everyone uncomfortable. She even claimed that the paramedics hadn't seemed that worried and that the hospital had kept me overnight just as a precaution, not because it was serious. That's when the slow burn in my chest changed. It was no longer the tightness from before, but something sharper. It was rage, the kind that doesn't explode and disappear, but simmers, gaining intensity over time. I could have overlooked it if they had just been indifferent. That was normal. But rewriting history to make me look bad, that was something else entirely. At the next family gathering, the favoritism and silent mockery were worse than ever. I didn't want to go, but I also knew that if I skipped it, they would interpret it as proof that I was still resentful or trying to get attention. So, 2 weeks later I showed up. Not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to see for myself how far they would take their narrative. That year the gathering was at my Aunt Laura's, a big suburban house with a garden that looked like it was from a magazine. The kind of place where appearances mattered more than anything. When I arrived, she greeted me with that overly bright hostess smile. "Ryan, so glad you're feeling better. You look fine now. I guess it wasn't as serious as they made it out to be, huh?" she said loud enough for the group of close relatives to hear. I caught the discreet laughs and the sidelong glances. Inside, the table was already set with food. I scanned the buffet and immediately noticed there were no labels on anything. After what happened last time, I was very conscious of what I ate. The doctor had told me to be cautious, to avoid certain ingredients until I had more tests. I quietly asked my Aunt Laura if she could tell me what was in some of the dishes to avoid another trip to the emergency room. She waved her hand. Oh, don't be dramatic. It's all homemade, it's fine. You're not going to have another one of your episodes. I bit my tongue and decided to eat only the bread rolls and salad, but even that didn't go unnoticed. Tyler, who already had a plate full of meat, pointed at me and said, "Still taking advantage of the barbecue thing, huh? You should be over it by now." A few people laughed. My dad, who was nearby, smiled instead of telling him to stop. For the first hour, I kept to myself, eating silently and chatting with the few relatives who weren't openly mocking me. But as the afternoon progressed, the atmosphere changed in a way I didn't see coming. Someone announced that it was time for games and they started setting up the trivia challenge they did every year. It was usually harmless, but this time I noticed something strange when I saw the prize on the counter. An envelope with my name written on it. I frowned and asked my Aunt Laura about it, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence. She smiled slightly. Oh, that's a little surprise. You'll see. When it was my turn to play, she made sure to call everyone to the living room. All right, everyone. This round is special, she said. We're going to play Guess the Lie with Ryan. We'll read 3 stories about him. 2 are true and 1 is made up. Everyone has to guess which one is the false one. I stood still as she continued. The first story was about a time I threw a drink at my cousin at a wedding and blamed the waiter. It was true, but I was 15 and it was an accident. The second was about me pretending to be sick at the previous year's get-together to avoid helping with the cleanup. Completely false. And the third was about the barbecue from 2 weeks ago, but in their version, I had faked not being able to breathe to get out of washing dishes. They even added that the paramedic supposedly told me it was probably nerves, and that I looked perfectly fine when I left in the ambulance. Everyone laughed. They were laughing at something that almost killed me. I could feel my hands trembling and the heat rising up my neck. My dad was in a corner, smiling. My mom sat motionless, but said nothing. Then, my Aunt Laura took the envelope. Here comes the fun part. If you guess the correct one, you get this $50 gift card. If no one guesses, Ryan gets to keep it. Guesses started flying. Some thought the barbecue story was false. Others, the get-together story. But in the end, enough people guessed correctly, which meant they all decided the barbecue story was the true one, and my Aunt Laura handed the envelope to Tyler. Tyler opened it, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside before he could hide it. It wasn't $50. It was a coupon for a barbecue restaurant. I don't think I've ever felt so low. This was no longer just mockery, or just favoritism. It was deliberate, calculated cruelty. They had turned my allergic reaction into a family joke, with a prize, and they had made sure the person who had mocked me the most rubbed it in my face. I left early that day without saying goodbye. But something inside me changed during the ride home. The trust, the little I had left, had vanished. This was no longer about misunderstandings or generational differences. This was about control, humiliation, and making sure I stayed in the role they had assigned me. And that day, I started planning exactly how I was going to dismantle that role, piece by piece. The ride home from that get-together felt longer than any road I had ever taken. My hands were tightly clenched on the steering wheel, but my mind was elsewhere, reliving every laugh, every mocking smile, every sidelong glance I had just endured. The image of the barbecue coupon kept flashing in my head like a neon sign. I could hear Tyler's smug voice, my Aunt Laura's cheerful tone, and my dad's silent approval. When I got to my apartment, I closed the door and stood in the dark for a few minutes. Normally, I would turn on the TV or scroll through my phone to distract myself, but this time, no distraction was big enough. Everything just stayed there, weighing on me. I realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was completely alone in this. I didn't just have a family that didn't support me. I had a family that saw me as entertainment, as someone they could publicly make fun of. The next few days were quiet, but in a hollow way. I went to work, came home, ate what I could quickly prepare, and barely spoke to anyone. I wasn't angry in an explosive sense anymore. I felt exhausted, almost numb, as if they had finally succeeded in squeezing all the energy out of me. Even the thought of confronting them seemed useless. What would I say? Please don't make fun of something that almost killed me? They would interpret it as me being too sensitive again. I started avoiding their calls. My Aunt Laura left a voicemail saying she needed me to bring dessert for Tyler's birthday. My dad sent me a text reminding me of a family workday to help at his house. I ignored both. I knew it would cause a stir, but for the first time, I didn't care. I cared about getting through each day without feeling my chest sink. But even as I isolated myself, I couldn't stop thinking about certain moments. The way the paramedic's voice had changed when he took my pulse. The firm tone of the doctor when he told my family I could have died. The fact that none of them, not my dad, not my Aunt Laura, not Tyler, took it seriously. It was a strange mix of feelings. Shame for having allowed them to treat me like that for so long and something sharper underneath. The beginning of a determination. The turning point came a week later, when I got my allergy test results. I was allergic to a specific ingredient that had been in one of my Aunt Laura's homemade sauces. It was so severe that the doctor insisted I always carry an EpiPen, avoid anything with even the slightest amount of that ingredient, and be prepared to seek emergency help immediately if I reacted again. He gave me a detailed report documenting the reaction, how dangerous it had been, and how lucky I was to have gotten help in time. Holding that paper in my hands, I felt a shift. It was no longer just my word against theirs. This was documented, an undeniable fact, and they had made fun of it. Not in private, not with an offhand comment, but in front of the whole family with a prize for the best joke. I didn't let them know the results. Not yet. Instead, I put the report in a drawer and started making small changes. I reduced contact even further. I kept my social media silent. I started logging every incident in a private document. Every text, every comment, every little jab. At first, it was just a way to get it out of my head. But the more I wrote, the more I started to see patterns and possibilities. Meanwhile, my silence didn't go unnoticed. A cousin told me my Aunt Laura had been saying I was sulking and isolating myself to make them feel guilty. Tyler, apparently, thought it was hilarious and said I would probably show up to Christmas with a medical alert bracelet just to get attention. My dad was telling people that he was giving me space to cool down, as if he were the reasonable person in all of this. It should have hurt, but instead, it clarified something for me. These people were not going to change. They were not going to apologize. And if I kept showing up, they would keep feeding on whatever reaction they could get from me. The only way to change anything was to stop playing that role entirely, but not before making sure they felt the consequences of how they had treated me. I still didn't know exactly what form that would take. The only thing I knew was that, for the first time in my life, I was done reacting on their terms. And when the perfect opportunity presented itself, I was ready. It's funny how quickly life can feel different once you stop devoting your energy to people who only drain you. After that day, I put my allergy report away. Things started to change slowly without the constant stream of family drama dragging me down. Suddenly, I had time and, more importantly, mental space to focus on myself. First, I put it into work. I had been in my position for years, flying under the radar, doing just enough to be reliable, but not reaching for more. Now, I dove into projects, stayed late, volunteered for tasks no one else wanted. It was no longer about proving anything to my family. It was about proving to myself that I could take up space in the world without their permission. At the end of the quarter, my manager called me in and told me I had been nominated for a promotion. It came with a significant raise, but what moved me more was the way she said, "You've really been stepping up lately." I walked out of that meeting feeling bigger than I had in years. Outside of work, I started investing in my own happiness. I signed up for a cooking class, partly because I wanted to learn how to prepare food that I knew was safe for me, but also because I enjoyed it. I joined a gym, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it felt good to be stronger. I even started reconnecting with old friends I had drifted away from. People who genuinely cared how I was doing, and who didn't treat my existence as a constant joke. The more I built this separate life, the less their noise mattered. My Aunt Laura's barbs didn't sting when I heard about them secondhand. Tyler's arrogance seemed almost pathetic compared to the small, steady victories I was racking up. My dad's dismissive tone in the few messages we exchanged read more as a desperate attempt to keep me tied down than as a show of authority. And then, something unexpected happened. My cooking instructor, who was also a local event organizer, asked me if I was interested in volunteering at a food festival in the city. It was a big event, a mix of restaurants, cooking schools, and local talent. I said yes without much thought, and it ended up being one of the best decisions I've ever made. Over that weekend, I met people from all over. Chefs, business owners, vendors. I found myself in conversations I never would have imagined a year ago. And one of those conversations turned into an opportunity to collaborate on a small project for a catering company. It was a paid, flexible gig, and something I could do alongside my main job. When it was over, they asked if I would be interested in more freelance work. Suddenly, I wasn't just doing well at my job. I had a growing side income doing something I enjoyed. I started saving that money, quietly building a financial cushion. And with each month that passed, I felt less and less tied to the version of me they had always known. The one who was always struggling, too sensitive, or not doing his part. Of course, my family noticed the distance. They noticed it even more when I started politely declining invitations to smaller get-togethers. My reasons were simple. I can't make it this time, I have plans. There were no excuses, no justifications, just boundaries. And that's when the text messages started to change tone. My dad's short reminders about events turned into, "Haven't seen you in a while. Everyone's wondering what you've been up to." My Aunt Laura's passive-aggressive comments became more direct. "I hope that little incident isn't keeping you away from family." Tyler didn't reach out at all, but I knew from a cousin that he had been telling people that I now thought I was too good for them. They were curious. They were uneasy. And for the first time in my life, I had something they didn't control. I knew things they didn't know. I was building a life they hadn't touched, one that was starting to eclipse the one they thought they had defined for me. I wasn't ready to make a move yet. But the next big family event was approaching, the kind of gathering where everyone would be there. And I had an idea forming in the back of my mind because I now had the resources, the evidence, and the confidence to completely change the script. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It was my mom who mentioned it first in one of her rare short calls, in which she kept her voice neutral, almost as if she didn't want my dad or my Aunt Laura to hear her. "You know your dad turns 60 this year, right? Laura is planning a big surprise party. Everyone's going to be there," she hesitated before adding. "It's supposed to be formal. She's really going all out." I could visualize it in my mind. My Aunt Laura using the event to cement her image as the perfect hostess. Tyler strutting around as if he were the co-host. My dad basking in the attention. And me, I was expected to show up silently, contribute in some way, and endure whatever jokes they decided to make at my expense that night. Only this time, I wasn't going to be the one taken by surprise. The first useful piece of information came to me a few days later. A catering contact from the food festival, someone I had stayed in touch with, posted on social media about booking a large private party on the same date my mom had mentioned. The location: a high-end event hall in the city. It didn't take me long to confirm that it was the same one my Aunt Laura had chosen for my dad's party. Now I not only knew where it would be, but I also knew who was catering, and I had a direct contact with them. That's when an idea began to take shape. I didn't have the whole plan yet, but I could already see ways to control the narrative for once, to make the night unfold on my own terms. My allergy report was still tucked away in my desk drawer, untouched since the day I got it. But the thought of it began to feel less like a medical document and more like a loaded weapon. Not in a malicious way, but in a way that could force the truth to come out without me having to raise my voice. In the meantime, I continued to play my role. I replied to my dad's occasional texts with short but polite answers. When my Aunt Laura sent the official group text inviting me to the party with a note that the dress code was black tie, no exceptions, I replied with a simple, "Looking forward to it." No sarcasm. No hint of my true intentions. Then, something else fell into place. The catering company needed extra help for a smaller event the week before the party, and they reached out to me to see if I was available. I said yes, knowing it would give me a perfect reason to chat informally with the head chef and some of the staff who would be working at my dad's event. I learned small but revealing details. The exact menu, the preparation timeline, and even how my Aunt Laura had insisted on having surprise speeches after dinner. That last part was pure gold. It meant there would be a moment in the night when the attention of the entire room would be focused on the stage. A moment when anything that was said would be impossible to ignore. I didn't give anyone any hints. I simply kept gathering information, making discreet calls, and mapping out how to use the night to my advantage. And as each piece of the puzzle fell into place, the anticipation began to grow. 4 years, they dictated the stage, the tone, and the story. But now, I had the location, the timing, and the perfect leverage to make sure the truth came out in front of each and every person who had laughed at my expense. And best of all, they wouldn't see it coming until it was too late to stop it. The night of my dad's 60th birthday arrived. Cool and pleasant. The kind of evening that made the city lights look sharper. I arrived at the event hall right on time, dressed to the nines in a black suit that actually fit me well. A small detail, but I knew it would subtly throw off some relatives who were used to making fun of my clothes. I walked in with a calm and confidence you only have when you know exactly what's going to happen and when. The hall was impressive. Crystal chandeliers, elegantly set round tables, and a buffet that looked like it was from a food magazine. I saw the catering team I had worked with before, and they greeted me with a subtle nod. We had already talked beforehand. They knew about my allergy and had gone to the trouble of clearly labeling every dish. That alone would have been enough to make my Aunt Laura grind her teeth, but that was just the opening move. The first hour went as I expected. People socialized, clinked glasses, chatted. My Aunt Laura made her grand rounds, introducing herself to anyone who hadn't yet been subject to her cloying sweetness. Tyler was at the bar, surrounded by a group of cousins, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. My dad was in his element, greeting guests with booming laughs. I played along. I smiled, shook hands, and let them believe I had shown up just to be a good sport. And when dinner was served, I made sure to get a little of everything. Each dish had a label, with a full list of ingredients for the sauces. I could feel my Aunt Laura watching me from across the room, her expression flickering with the slightest hint of irritation because her old, "don't be dramatic" trick wouldn't work tonight. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The speeches. The lights dimmed a little, the microphone was placed, and my Aunt Laura, of course, took the stage first. She gave a long self-congratulatory toast about how much work it had been to plan the party, how wonderful it was to have all the family together, and how in the end, family was about laughter and not taking yourself too seriously. I knew exactly what she was referring to. She handed the microphone to Tyler, who gave a short rambling speech, mostly about himself, but ended it with a joke about making sure I stayed away from the barbecue table this time. A few polite laughs echoed through the room. My dad chuckled. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, letting the silence settle, and walked toward the stage. My Aunt Laura handed me the microphone with a forced smile. I could see she didn't expect me to speak, but she wasn't going to make a scene by refusing to give it to me. I started simply. I wasn't going to say anything tonight, I said, my voice firm and serene. But since this is a celebration of family, I think it's the perfect time to clear something up. 2 months ago at the barbecue, I had what the doctor later confirmed was a severe allergic reaction. My airways began to close. My blood pressure dropped. If the ambulance had been 10 minutes later, I might not be here tonight. The room fell silent. You couldn't hear the movement of chairs or the clinking of glasses, just stillness. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the folded paper, the allergy report with the doctor's notes. This is the medical documentation, with every symptom, every detail. I carry it with me now just in case. And I want everyone here to know that, in the middle of that reaction, my own family accused me of faking it. They laughed about it. They turned it into a game. A murmur went through the crowd. I could see heads turning toward my Aunt Laura and my dad. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, I continued. I'm telling you because for years I've been the target of their jokes, and I let it go because I thought keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But this, I said, lightly touching the paper. This is the line. I will no longer play that role. I handed the paper to the cousin who was closest to the stage. Pass it around if you want. It's not my word against anyone's. It's the truth in black and white. Then, without raising my voice or adding anything dramatic, I placed the microphone back in its stand and stepped down from the stage. I didn't look at my Aunt Laura, or Tyler, or my dad. I simply returned to my seat, picked up my glass of water, and took a sip as the silence remained heavy in the room. That silence was worth every second of planning. But it was the reaction that came after, slow, subtle, and then suddenly sharp, that told me the night was far from over. It started with whispers, soft at first, as if people were trying to process what they had just heard. Then, the murmurs turned into groups of discreet conversations, with heads tilted toward each other. I didn't have to listen closely to know that the tone had changed. The polite smiles were gone, replaced by uneasy glances toward the front of the room. My Aunt Laura was frozen next to the podium, still holding her wine glass as if she couldn't decide whether to take a sip or throw it. My dad's face was flushed, not with embarrassment, but with that stubborn bristling defensiveness he always showed when someone challenged him in public. Tyler, on the other hand, was smiling in disbelief, as if he expected someone to step in and save them from the awkwardness. But no one did. Instead, an older cousin, one who had been at that barbecue and apparently hadn't realized the seriousness of what happened, approached my table. "Ryan, I didn't know it was like that. I'm sorry. That's not right, he said loud enough for the close relatives to hear, and I caught the flicker of discomfort on my dad's face. Another aunt chimed in, agreeing. Then, a few more voices joined in unison. The social tide was turning right in front of them. My Aunt Laura tried to recover, stepping forward with a laugh that sounded as fragile as paper. Well, I think we can all agree that Ryan is making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Laura, someone from across the room interrupted her sharply. He almost died. It's not a joke. That was it. The dam broke. People started questioning them directly. Why didn't you take it seriously? Why did you turn it into a game? Did you really give a coupon for a barbecue after that? The catering staff, who had heard enough while setting up everything, discreetly confirmed that the menu labels were something they decided to do after I told them my story. That alone made my Aunt Laura's attitude look even worse. My dad just stood there, trying to silence the room, but the more he spoke, the worse it got. His insistence that it had all been in good faith only made the criticism louder. For the first time in my life, I saw them lose control of the narrative. Not because I yelled or walked out, but because their own behavior was finally exposed to the very audience they had always performed for. The rest of the night was tense. Some relatives avoided them altogether and came over to me. Others left early, clearly uncomfortable. The speeches were over. The easy laughter was gone. As for me, I stayed until dessert, enjoying quiet conversations with people I had barely spoken to at previous gatherings. And when I finally got up to leave, I walked past my Aunt Laura and my dad without saying a word. My dad muttered something under his breath, but I didn't stop. It wasn't necessary. The last thing I saw before walking out into the night was my Aunt Laura standing alone at the empty podium, scanning the room as if she was still trying to figure out how everything had fallen apart so quickly. And for the first time in years, I realized they weren't laughing anymore.